The rain hammered against the pavement as Jayden Cole collapsed to his knees in the gutter, his once pristine suit now torn and soaked through. Muddy water dripped from his hair as he watched the red taillights of the luxury car disappear into the night. The same car that had just splashed him with filthy street water. The laughter still echoed in his ears. His own best friend's laughter. His girlfriend's laughter. The woman he thought loved him. The friend he thought he could trust. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this homeless-looking man, shivering in the rain, was actually worth $3.7 billion. And he was about to discover a truth so shocking, so heartbreaking, that it would change everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and human nature. Before we dive into this emotional roller coaster that will leave you questioning everything you believe about relationships, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible stories, and drop a comment, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. 6 months earlier, Jayden Cole was living what most people would call the perfect life. At 32, he had built TechVault Industries from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar empire. His face graced the covers of Forbes and Time magazine. His penthouse overlooked the glittering skyline of Manhattan. His garage housed a collection of supercars that could fund a small country's budget. But despite all his success, despite all his wealth, there was an emptiness gnawing at him, a question that kept him awake at night. Did anyone actually love him for who he was, or were they all just attracted to what he had? This question became even more pressing when he thought about Maya Rodriguez, the stunning influencer he'd been dating for 8 months. With her flowing dark hair, perfect smile, and 2 million Instagram followers, Maya was everything that looked perfect on paper. She'd slide into his DMs after seeing him featured in a tech magazine, and their first date had been magical dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, followed by a helicopter ride over the harbor. She'd seemed genuinely interested in his work, his passions, his dreams. But lately something felt off. Maya only seemed excited when he surprised her with expensive gifts. Her eyes would light up when he mentioned taking her to Paris or Dubai. But when he tried to have deeper conversations about life, about the future, about what really mattered to them both, she'd quickly change the subject or find an excuse to scroll through her phone. She'd pose with every luxury item he bought her, posting them to her stories with captions like, "When your man treats you right," and "Living my best life." But she never posted simple moments, just the two of them talking, laughing, being real. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in his penthouse. Jayden had been working late on a new algorithm that could revolutionize cloud computing. He was genuinely excited about the breakthrough, the kind of excitement that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with technology in the first place. When Maya arrived for their dinner date, he couldn't contain his enthusiasm. "Maya, you won't believe what we accomplished today," he said, his eyes bright with passion. This new system could help small businesses across the world access computing power they could never afford before. We're talking about leveling the playing field for entrepreneurs in developing countries, giving them the same technological advantages as Fortune 500. Maya glanced up from her phone where she'd been editing photos from her latest photo shoot. "That's nice, babe," she said absently, then immediately returned to her screen. "Do you think this filter makes my skin look too orange? I can't decide between Valencia and Ludwig." Something cold settled in Jayden's chest. He just shared something that could impact millions of lives, something he'd worked 18-hour days to perfect, and she was more concerned about Instagram filters. "Maya," he said quietly, "did you hear what I just told you?" She looked up again, this time with a slight irritation in her voice. "Yes, Jayden, computer stuff. Very impressive. But look, I need to post this photo while the lighting still looks good. The engagement rates are better when I post before 8 p.m. That night, As Maya slept beside him in his king-size bed, Jayden stared at the ceiling and made a decision that would change everything. He was going to test her, not with jewelry or trips or expensive dinners, but with something far more revealing. He was going to see what happened when all the money disappeared. The plan began to form in his mind over the following weeks. It would have to be elaborate, convincing, and most importantly, temporary. He couldn't actually lose his company. Too many employees depended on him. Too many projects were in motion. But he could make it appear as though he'd lost everything. That's where Dre Williams came in. Dre had been Jayden's best friend since they were 12 years old, growing up in the same working-class neighborhood in Oakland. While Jayden had always been the tech genius, Dre had been the smooth talker, the one who could convince anyone of anything. When Jayden started TechVault Industries, Dre had been his first hire, eventually becoming the company's chief operating officer. They'd been through everything together, the early days of eating ramen noodles and sleeping on office couches, the first major breakthrough that brought in millions, the IPO that made them both wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. If anyone could help him pull off this elaborate deception, it was Dre. On a Thursday morning, Jayden walked into Dre's corner office on the 42nd floor of the TechVault building. The San Francisco Bay sparkled in the distance, and Dre was leaning back in his leather chair, reviewing quarterly reports. "Dre, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond," Jayden said, closing the door behind him. Dre looked up, immediately sensing the seriousness in his friend's voice. "What's going on, Jay? You look like someone died." Jayden sat down across from his oldest friend and laid out the entire plan. He would stage a hostile takeover of his own company, making it appear as though he'd been ousted by the board and lost everything. Dre would temporarily take over as CEO, and Jayden would disappear from the public eye. To make it even more convincing, Dre would offer him a menial job, janitorial work at his own company, which Jayden would accept. They'd maintain the charade for a few months, just long enough to see how Maya reacted when she thought he was broke. Dre listened in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "Bro, this is insane," Dre finally said. "You want to give up a multi-billion-dollar company to test whether your girlfriend loves you for your money?" "Temporarily give up," Jayden corrected. "And yes, I need to know, Dre. I need to know if anyone in my life actually cares about me as a person, or if they're all just here for the lifestyle." Dre was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the bay. "And you trust me to give it all back when this crazy experiment is over?" "With my life," Jayden said without hesitation. "You're the only person I trust completely. You've been my brother since we were kids. If I can't trust you, I can't trust anyone." Something flickered across Dre's face, so quickly that Jayden almost missed it. But then Dre smiled and reached across the desk to clasp his friend's hand. "All right, man, if this is what you need to do, I've got your back. But when this blows up in your face and Maya proves she actually loves you, you owe me the biggest apology in history." "Deal," Jayden said, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. "Let's do this." The plan took 3 weeks to execute perfectly. Jayden's legal team, who were sworn to secrecy and handsomely compensated for their discretion, created a complex web of shell companies and paper transactions that made it appear as though TechVault Industries had been acquired in a hostile takeover. The tech blogs exploded with the news. Billionaire tech CEO Jayden Cole loses everything in shocking corporate coup. The headlines painted a picture of a young entrepreneur who had gotten too comfortable, too careless, and had been outmaneuvered by more experienced corporate raiders. To the outside world, Jayden Cole had lost his company, his fortune, and his status overnight. The first test came that very evening. Jayden sat in his penthouse, which he'd secretly purchased through one of his shell companies months earlier, ensuring he could keep it even in his bankruptcy, waiting for Maya to arrive for their dinner date. He dressed down significantly, a simple t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual designer clothing, and he'd hidden all the obvious signs of wealth throughout the apartment. When Maya walked in, her usual confidence seemed subdued. She'd obviously seen the news. "Jayden," she said carefully, "I saw the headlines. Is it all true?" He nodded, putting on his best defeated expression. "Everything. The company, the assets, even most of my personal accounts. The lawyers say I might be able to recover some of it eventually, but right now," he gestured helplessly around the apartment, "this place is about all I have left, and I'm not even sure I can afford to keep it." Maya's face went through a series of micro-expressions: shock, concern, and something else. Something that looked almost like calculation. "Oh my God, Jayden, I'm so sorry," she said. But her voice lacked the warmth he'd expected. She sat down beside him on the couch, but didn't reach for his hand the way she usually did. "What are you going to do?" "Dre offered me a job," Jayden said, watching her reaction carefully. "It's not much janitorial work at the company, basically, but it's something. It'll help me get back on my feet." The look that crossed Maya's face lasted only a split second, but Jayden caught it. Disgust. She was disgusted by the idea of him working as a janitor. That's really generous of Dre," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm sure things will work out somehow." But for the rest of the evening, Maya seemed distant. She checked her phone constantly, responded to his attempts at conversation with short answers, and left earlier than usual, claiming she had an early photo shoot the next morning. As the days passed, the change in Maya became more and more obvious. Her text messages, which used to be frequent and flirty, became sporadic and formal. She cancelled their weekend trip to Napa, claiming she wasn't feeling well. When he suggested they have dinner at their favorite restaurant, she said she was trying to eat healthier and suggested they stay in instead, but then spent the entire evening on her phone, barely acknowledging his presence. The most telling moment came 2 weeks after the fake takeover. Jayden had started his job as a janitor at Tech Vault Industries, arriving early in the morning to clean the offices before the regular employees arrived. It was surreal, walking through the halls of the company he'd built, emptying trash cans and mopping floors. But it was also enlightening. He heard conversations he'd never heard before, saw how employees interacted when they thought no one important was watching. On this particular morning, he was cleaning the executive floor when he heard voices coming from Dre's office, his old office. He recognized Maya's laugh immediately. Heart pounding, Jayden crept closer to the door, which was slightly ajar. "Can't believe how pathetic he looks now," Maya was saying, her voice dripping with disdain. "Walking around in those cheap clothes, talking about his new beginning and finding himself. It's honestly embarrassing." Dre's voice was equally dismissive. "I almost feel bad for the guy, but honestly, he had it coming. He got too comfortable, too trusting. In this business, you can't afford to be naive." "I mean, I tried to stick by him at first," Maya continued, "but what's the point? I'm not going to waste my prime years dating a janitor. My followers expect a certain lifestyle, and I can't give them that with someone who empties trash cans for a living." Jayden felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. The woman he'd thought he might marry was not only talking about him with complete contempt, but she was doing it with his best friend in his own office. But then Maya said something that made his blood run cold. "Besides, it's not like this is a huge loss. I mean, he was sweet, but he was never really my type. Too serious, too focused on work. You're so much more fun, Dre. So much more exciting." There was a rustling sound, and then Dre's voice, lower and more intimate. "You know you're incredible, right? Jayden never deserved someone like you." Jayden's world tilted on its axis. They weren't just talking about him behind his back. They were involved, romantically involved. His girlfriend and his best friend had been carrying on an affair, and his fake bankruptcy had simply given them the excuse they needed to be open about it. He backed away from the door silently, his hands shaking. 20 years of friendship, 8 months of what he'd thought was love. All of it had been a lie. The next few weeks were the darkest of Jayden's life. He continued his charade, playing the role of the fallen entrepreneur, trying to rebuild his life. But inside, he was falling apart. Every day, he had to watch Maya and Dre together. Every day, he had to pretend he didn't know what was happening. Maya stopped visiting him altogether, claiming she was too busy with work to maintain their relationship. She didn't officially break up with him, she just gradually faded away, responding to his messages less and less frequently, until the communication stopped entirely. Meanwhile, Dre seemed to take sadistic pleasure in Jayden's supposed downfall. He'd make Jayden clean his office while he worked, sometimes while Maya was there, giggling at private jokes, and making plans that deliberately excluded the man they both thought was nothing more than hired help. The lowest moment came on a rainy Tuesday night in November. Jayden had worked late, finishing a deep clean of the conference rooms, and was walking home to his apartment. He'd sold his cars as part of the bankruptcy charade, so he was on foot, wearing a thin jacket that did little to protect him from the cold rain. As he trudged down the sidewalk, headlights swept across him from behind. A sleek black Porsche. His old Porsche, the one that was now registered under one of Dre's shell companies, pulled up beside him. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see Dre in the driver's seat, with Maya in the passenger seat. They were both laughing about something, completely absorbed in each other, until Dre noticed the solitary figure walking in the rain. "Well, well," Dre said, rolling down the window. "Look what we have here." "Jayden, what are you doing walking in this weather, man?" Jayden stopped, water dripping from his hair, and looked at the two people who had betrayed him so completely. "Just heading home," he said quietly. Maya looked at him with an expression that was part pity, part disgust. "You really should invest in an umbrella," she said with a laugh that cut through him like glass. "Or better yet," Dre added, "maybe save up for a car. I hear they're pretty useful for getting around." They both burst into laughter at this, as if Jayden's situation was the funniest thing in the world. Then, as Dre pulled away, he hit the gas just hard enough to send a wave of muddy water from a nearby puddle splashing across Jayden's legs. Their laughter echoed down the street as they disappeared into the night, leaving Jayden standing alone in the rain, soaked and shivering. That's when he saw her. Alyssa Chen was walking on the other side of the street, clearly getting off work from her late shift at the diner down the block. She wore a simple uniform under a worn coat, and she was hurrying through the rain just like everyone else. But when she saw Jayden standing there drenched and motionless, she stopped. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the empty street. Then, without a word, Alyssa crossed over to him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but concerned. Jayden looked at this stranger, this woman he'd never seen before, who had no idea who he was or what he was worth, and felt something crack inside his chest. "I'm fine," he said automatically, but his voice broke on the words. Alyssa studied his face for a moment, then opened her small umbrella and held it over both of them. "No, you're not," she said simply. "And that's okay. We all have bad days." She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't probe or pry or try to fix anything. She just stood there with him in the rain, sharing her umbrella with a complete stranger. "There's a 24-hour diner just around the corner," she said after a moment. "They have decent coffee, and it's warm. Do you want to get out of this rain?" Jayden nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The diner was one of those timeless places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s, red vinyl booths, a long counter with spinning stools, and a jukebox in the corner that played songs from decades past. At this hour, it was nearly empty, except for a few night shift workers grabbing coffee and a trucker working on a late dinner. Alyssa led him to a booth in the back and signaled to the waitress, "2 coffees, please, and could you bring some extra napkins?" As they waited for their drinks, Jayden found himself really looking at the woman who had rescued him from the rain. Alyssa was beautiful, but not in the manufactured way that Maya was beautiful. Her beauty was natural, understated. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and when she smiled, it reached all the way to those eyes. "I'm Alyssa," she said, extending her hand across the table. "Jayden," he replied, shaking her hand and noticing how warm it was, despite the cold rain. "So, Jayden," she said as their coffee arrived, "do you want to talk about what happened back there? Or would you prefer to sit in comfortable silence while we warm up?" The simple kindness of giving him the choice, talk or don't talk, both were fine, nearly brought tears to his eyes. When was the last time someone had offered him that kind of unconditional acceptance? "It's been a rough few months," he said finally. "I thought I knew who the people in my life were, but it turns out I was wrong about pretty much everyone." Alyssa nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "That's one of the hardest things to deal with, when people you trust turn out to be different than you thought." "You sound like you know from experience." She smiled ruefully. "My ex-fiancé. Turned out he was cheating with my best friend for most of our relationship. Found out when I came home early from work one day and caught them together in our bed." "I'm sorry," Jayden said, and meant it. "It was devastating at the time," Alyssa continued, "but honestly, it was also a gift. Better to find out before the wedding than after, and it taught me something important about people's true character, which is, you don't really know someone until you see how they treat you when you're vulnerable, when you're down, when you need them, when there's nothing in it for them to be kind to you. That's when people show you who they really are." Jayden stared at her, struck by the wisdom in those words. "And what about you? Why did you help a stranger in the rain?" Alyssa shrugged as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Because you looked like you needed help, and I could provide it. Sometimes it's really that simple." They talked for 2 hours. Jayden learned that Alyssa was 28, working 2 jobs to support herself while she finished her degree in social work. She wanted to help kids who were aging out of the foster care system, kids like she had been. She'd grown up in group homes, had no family money to fall back on, and was building her life entirely through her own determination and hard work. She had every reason to be bitter, to be hardened by life, but instead she radiated a warmth and genuine care for others that Jayden had never encountered before. When she insisted on paying for both their coffees with the small bills from her tip jar, despite his protests, Jayden realized he was seeing something he'd never seen before. True generosity, not the kind that came from having so much that giving didn't hurt, but the kind that came from having very little and choosing to share it anyway. As they prepared to leave, Alyssa took off her sweater, a simple cardigan that was clearly one of her nicer pieces of clothing, and handed it to him. "You're soaked through," she said. "This will help keep you warm on the way home." "I can't take your sweater," Jayden protested. "You'll be cold." "I have another layer underneath, and I live closer than you do," she said, pressing the sweater into his hands. "Besides, you can return it when you're feeling better. That way I know I'll see you again." The simple gesture, giving him her sweater, but also giving him a reason to see her again, touched something deep in Jayden's heart. Over the following weeks, Jayden found himself looking forward to these chance encounters with Alyssa. They'd meet at the diner, or she'd see him walking home from work and they'd share her umbrella. She never asked what had happened to put him in his current situation, and he never volunteered the information. To her, he was just Jayden, a man who was going through a difficult time and trying to rebuild his life. And slowly, day by day, conversation by conversation, Jayden began to fall in love. Not the intense, passionate kind of love he'd thought he'd felt for Maya, but something deeper, quieter, more real. Lissa's kindness wasn't performed or calculated. It was simply part of who she was. She helped elderly customers at the diner, even when they weren't her tables. She gave directions to lost tourists, even when she was running late for work. She fed stray cats behind her apartment building, even though she could barely afford to feed herself. Being with Alyssa was like discovering what love actually felt like when it wasn't mixed with performance, expectation, or transaction. She didn't love him for what he could give her. She didn't even know what he could give her. She loved him for who he was when he had nothing to offer but himself. Meanwhile, the situation at TechVault Industries was becoming more complex. Dre, drunk on his temporary power and the attention that came with running a billion-dollar company, was starting to make decisions that Jayden found increasingly disturbing. He was cutting research and development budgets to boost short-term profits. He was laying off long-time employees to improve quarterly numbers. He was entertaining offers from competitors who wanted to acquire key pieces of TechVault's technology. From his position as a janitor, Jayden watched his life's work being slowly dismantled by someone he'd trusted completely. The worst part was that Dre seemed to be enjoying it. He'd strut through the offices like he owned the place, which according to all legal documents he did, making grand pronouncements about his vision for the company's future. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in December. Jayden was cleaning the conference room when he overheard Dre on a phone call with a representative from Megacorp, TechVault's biggest competitor. The cloud security algorithm. "Yeah, I can make that happen," Dre was saying. Jayden was always too protective of his little innovations. "But I understand the value of strategic partnerships. We can have the full technical documentation transferred to your team by Monday." Jayden's blood ran cold. The cloud security algorithm was his masterpiece, a revolutionary system that had taken him 3 years to develop and that formed the backbone of TechVault's competitive advantage. Dre was preparing to sell it to their biggest rival. This wasn't just about temporary stewardship anymore. Dre was actively trying to destroy everything Jayden had built. That night, Jayden made 2 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, instructing him to begin the process of reclaiming legal control of TechVault Industries. They'd gathered enough evidence of Dre's mismanagement and potential fraud to justify the move, and all the shell company structures were designed to be reversible. The second call was to Alyssa. "Hey," he said when she answered. "I know this is short notice, but would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere nice. I have something important I need to tell you." "Is everything okay?" she asked, concern immediately evident in her voice. "Everything's going to be okay," he said. "But there are some things about me that you don't know, and I think it's time you knew them." They met at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, not one of the ultra-exclusive places Jayden used to frequent with Maya, but a family-owned place with checkered tablecloths and the kind of authentic food that came from recipes passed down through generations. Alyssa looked beautiful in a simple blue dress, probably the nicest dress she owned. Jayden realized, worn because he'd said it was important. "So," she said once they'd ordered, "what's this big revelation?" Jayden took a deep breath. "Alyssa, I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am." Her face grew serious. "Are you married?" "No, nothing like that. It's more complicated than that." He paused, trying to find the right words. "Do you remember a few months ago, when TechVault Industries was in the news, when their CEO supposedly lost everything in a hostile takeover?" Alyssa nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember. Some young billionaire who got outmaneuvered by his competitors. It was all over the news for a while." That CEO was me, Jayden said quietly. I'm Jayden Cole, and I didn't lose everything. I staged the whole thing. Alyssa stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry. What? I faked my own downfall, he continued. I wanted to see how the people in my life would react if they thought I'd lost all my money. I wanted to know if anyone actually cared about me, or if they were all just there for the lifestyle I could provide. And what did you discover? Alyssa asked, her voice very quiet. I discovered that my girlfriend was cheating on me with my best friend. I discovered that people I'd trusted with my life were willing to mock me and humiliate me the moment they thought I was powerless. I discovered that almost everyone I'd thought cared about me was really just there for what I could give them. Alyssa was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, she spoke. And me, was I part of this test too? The pain in her voice nearly broke Jayden's heart. No, he said quickly. Alyssa, you were never part of any test. Meeting you was the one real thing that came out of all this deception. You helped me when you thought I was nobody. You were kind to me when you had no reason to be. You've shown me what it feels like to be cared for without conditions. But you lied to me, she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. For weeks you let me think you were struggling, that you were just some guy trying to get back on his feet. You let me pay for your coffee, give you my sweater, worry about whether you were eating enough. I know, Jayden said, reaching across the table toward her hand. I know, and I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go on this long. At first, I just needed to see the test through. But then I started falling for you, and I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd see me differently. Alyssa pulled her hand back. Of course I would have seen you differently. Not because of the money, but because of the honesty. How am I supposed to trust someone who's built our entire relationship on a lie? It wasn't a lie, Jayden said desperately. Everything I felt for you was real. Everything I told you about myself was real. The only thing I didn't tell you was about the money. The money isn't the point, Alyssa said, standing up from the table. The point is that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You let me make assumptions about your life, about your situation, about who you were. You watched me worry about you, watched me try to take care of you, and you never once thought to be honest with me. She grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. Jayden threw money on the table and followed her. Alyssa, please, he called out as she reached the sidewalk. Let me explain. She turned around, and the hurt in her eyes was devastating. Explain what, Jayden? That you thought so little of me that you assumed I'd only be interested in you if you were rich? That you believed I was the kind of person who would treat you differently based on your bank account? That's not what I thought, Jayden protested. Isn't it? Because if you'd trusted me, if you'd really believed that I cared about you for who you are, you would have told me the truth weeks ago. She was right, and they both knew it. I need some time, Alyssa said finally. I need to think about all of this. She walked away, leaving Jayden standing alone on the sidewalk, realizing that in his quest to discover who truly cared about him, he might have lost the only person who actually did. But Jayden didn't have time to wallow in his heartbreak, because the next Monday brought the culmination of months of careful planning. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. The official agenda simply stated, urgent company matters, but Jayden's legal team had been working through the weekend to prepare the bombshell they were about to drop. G arrived at the conference room looking confident and relaxed, clearly believing this was just another routine meeting where he'd continue to consolidate his power. The other board members, most of whom had been with TechVault since its early days, filed in looking concerned. They'd been hearing rumors about potential acquisitions and major strategy changes, and they wanted answers. Gentlemen, Dre began, taking his seat at the head of the table, thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know there have been some questions about our recent strategic initiatives, and I wanted to address those directly. Actually, came a voice from the doorway. I think I'll be handling this meeting. Every head in the room turned as Jayden Cole walked in, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. He looked nothing like the defeated janitor who had been emptying their trash cans for the past 3 months. Dre's face went white. Jayden, what are you doing here? How did you even get past security? It's interesting that you ask about security, Jayden said, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table from Dre. Because according to these documents, I'm still the majority shareholder and CEO of Tech Vault Industries. Which means security works for me, not you. The room erupted in confused murmurs as Jayden's lawyer began distributing copies of the legal documents that proved the hostile takeover had been an elaborate fiction. The shell companies, the paper transactions, the temporary transfers of power, all of it had been carefully designed to be reversible, and now the reversal was happening. This is impossible, Dre stammered. You lost everything. The takeover was real. I have the paperwork. You have paperwork showing that you were given temporary operational control of the company, Jayden's lawyer interjected. But at no point did Mr. Cole actually relinquish his ownership stake. The entire situation was what we call a controlled simulation designed to test certain business relationships. Dre's shock was transforming into rage. A simulation? You're telling me this whole thing was fake? The bankruptcy was fake, Jayden confirmed. The takeover was fake. The loss of assets was fake. But your reaction to it? That was very real. Jayden nodded to his assistant, who wheeled in a large monitor and began setting up a video presentation. For the past 3 months, Jayden continued, while serving as a janitor in my own company, I've been documenting some very disturbing behavior from our acting CEO, including several attempts to sell proprietary technology to our competitors without board approval. The first video clip showed Dre in his office, on the phone with Megacorp, discussing the sale of TechVault's cloud security algorithms. The room fell silent as they watched Dre casually promise to transfer trade secrets worth millions of dollars. This is taken out of context, Dre protested, but his voice lacked conviction. The second clip showed Dre and Maya in the same office, laughing about Jayden's supposed downfall and discussing their affair in graphic detail. You see, Jayden said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. This little experiment revealed something fascinating. When people think you're powerless, they show you exactly who they really are. The board members were looking at Dre with expressions ranging from disgust to fury. They'd trusted him to maintain the company's integrity, and instead he'd been planning to sell it piece by piece. The board will need to vote on Mr. Williams' immediate termination, Jayden's lawyer announced, as well as the potential criminal charges related to attempted corporate espionage and fraud. The vote was unanimous. As security escorted a stunned and raging Dre from the building, Jayden felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. 20 years of friendship, destroyed by greed and betrayal. But Maya wasn't done yet. That evening she showed up at his penthouse, tears streaming down her face, claiming she'd been manipulated by Dre, that she'd never stopped loving Jayden, that she'd made a terrible mistake. When crocodile tears didn't work, she played her final card. Jayden, I'm pregnant, she sobbed. It's yours, we're going to be a family. Jayden looked at the woman who had mocked him, betrayed him, and humiliated him, and felt nothing but pity. Maya, he said quietly, I have security footage of you telling Dre that the baby is his. From 3 weeks ago. Her face crumbled as she realized her last manipulation had failed. Get out, Jayden said, and don't ever contact me again. 6 months later, Jayden stood in the elegant ballroom of the Four Seasons, watching Alyssa work the room at the charity gala he'd organized for foster children. She'd eventually forgiven him after weeks of honest conversations and his patient willingness to prove he'd changed. She now ran the Cole Foundation, their joint charitable organization, and she did it with the same genuine heart that had first drawn him to her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jayden said, taking the microphone, "I'd like to introduce you to someone very special." He called Alyssa to the stage, and as she approached, confused but smiling, he dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring, not a massive diamond meant to impress, but a simple, elegant band that matched her personality perfectly. "Alyssa Chen," he said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "You loved me when you thought I had nothing. You saw the real me when I couldn't see it myself. Will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, she said yes. The proposal went viral within hours, but this time, Jayden didn't care about the attention. He'd learned the difference between love that was performed for the world and love that was lived in quiet moments, between people who wanted to be seen with you and people who simply wanted to see you happy. As for Dre and Maya, Dre faced federal charges for corporate espionage and served 2 years in prison. Maya's influencer career collapsed when the truth about the affair came out, her followers abandoning her for more authentic content creators. But Jayden barely thought about them anymore. He'd learnt that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so beautiful that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Standing at the altar 6 months later, watching Alyssa walk down the aisle in a simple white dress that made her glow with happiness, Jayden realized his test had revealed something more valuable than he'd ever imagined. It wasn't just about discovering who was real and who was fake. It was about discovering what real love actually looked like. And it looked like a woman who would share her umbrella with a stranger in the rain, who would give her sweater to someone she barely knew, who would love you not for what you could give her but for who you became when you had nothing left to give but yourself. So what would you do if you discovered the people closest to you were only there for your money? Would you forgive a betrayal like this? Could you trust again after being deceived by your best friend and the woman you loved? And most importantly, would you have the courage to choose real love over comfortable lies? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature.